Good morning, beautiful people. My name is Dunya Zara, and I'm the Youth Leadership Program Manager here at the YWCA Edmonton. Thank you all for joining us this morning. On behalf of our board, our staff, and most especially on behalf of the thousands of individuals we serve each year, we welcome you to our 10th annual Rose Campaign fundraising event presented by EPCOR's Heart and Soul Fund. This event is held in honor of the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. This is YWCA Edmonton's marquee fundraiser, and we are delighted to have you with us this morning. As we begin this morning, I would like to acknowledge that we are all here on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence and bring vibrancy to our community. A special welcome to our dignitaries and esteemed guests this morning. You can find their names in the chat, listed in the chat. And these are people who are strong allies in the pursuit of gender equity and violence reduction. And we're honored to have them join us this morning. I would also like to welcome all of our board members and thank them all for their time and the commitment that they bring to the YWCA Edmonton. This year, more than ever, their wisdom and guidance has been especially important as we have adjusted to safely support all of our communities through COVID-19. Lastly, a shout out to the brilliant young women from the Jean Forrest Leadership Academy. Every year, students from the Academy take the time to volunteer for the Rose Breakfast. They understand that this issue is vitally important to them and to our society. We are deeply appreciative of their long-standing commitment to the YWCA Edmonton. And as we begin today's program, or this morning's program, we welcome a quick note from Stuart Lee, EPCOR's President and CEO.
Hi, I'm Stuart Lee, President and CEO of EPCOR. Thank you for taking part in this annual Rose campaign and showing your commitment to ending gender-based violence. Each year at this time, we commemorate the lives of 14 young women who were murdered 27 years ago in Montreal at L'École Polytechnique. The Rose campaign was started to bring attention to the fact that violence against women is still happening and that Canada is not yet a safe country for all women. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a pronounced effect on the increasing rates of family violence, which is why, as we remember the 14 young women who died in 1989, I am asking each of you to commit to taking action on violence against women and girls that is still happening today. Not only does EPCOR support this important movement, but for me, as a father of two young men, this is especially important. Talking to my kids about gender-based violence is just as critical as ensuring they're doing well in school. Real change is possible through collective efforts, through crucial conversations, and through examples that we set for our children. One of the reasons EPCOR created the Heart and Soul Fund was to provide a lifeline for those hardest hit by COVID-19, including those at risk of violence at home. We are inspired by the important work the YWCA is doing to spark dialogue and bring about change in culture to end violence against women. Once again, thank you for your support and participation today. Now, more than ever, we must come together, educate ourselves about this crisis, and commit to change. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart, for your words, and to EPCOR for your support and generous donation to the YWCA Edmonton through the Heart and Soul Fund. Now, I would like to introduce and welcome Catherine O'Neill. Catherine O'Neill joined the YWCA Edmonton as Chief Executive Officer in March 2020, the day the lockdown began. She is a passionate advocate for the rights of girls and women, and she inspires people to hear the important call of community service. Catherine has worked in leadership positions in communication and in politics throughout her career, and her leadership through this challenging year has been pivotal as we've navigated this pandemic. This is the first public event we've hosted since Catherine joined the YWCA, and it is my great honor to officially introduce you all to our CEO. Please welcome Catherine.
Thanks, Dunya, for your introduction and all the work you do at YWCA Edmonton to make our community a safer, kinder, and more equitable place for girls to grow up in. And thank you at home for joining us this morning. It is a great honor to lead YWCA Edmonton, an organization that's been a powerful voice for gender equity and social progress in our community since 1907. I was drawn to YWCA Edmonton because of its life-changing services and programs for women and girls, and its fearless and tireless work bringing people together to solve some of the great challenges facing our community, including, unfortunately, gender-based violence. Challenges like ending violence against women, girls, and gender-diverse people may seem insurmountable, even impossible to solve. But my sincere hope is that you will leave our Rose Campaign event today fired up and empowered to help us with this important work. We all have the power to take action to help end gender-based violence. But first, let's stop and remember the still unspeakable horrors of December 6, 1989. Do you remember where you were on that chilly December day 31 years ago? Were you even born yet? I was a 14-year-old girl watching television with my father when a CBC News bulletin broke into the show we were watching to tell us about the murderous rampage happening in the halls of École Polytechnique in Montreal.
There was utter pandemonium outside the university building as ambulances carted away the injured. Police have now confirmed 14 students dead, all women.
It was a chaotic blur of crying, police sirens, and horrific images that still haunt our country. 14 young women had been murdered by a man at gunpoint simply because they were women. Their bright futures erased in minutes during a bloody, senseless act of deadly violence. I remember looking over at my father, tears streaming down my cheeks, both of us in shock. I remember feeling a deep sense of loss, helplessness, and bewilderment. And I remember thinking, how could this happen to someone simply because of their gender? I am grateful that December 6th has become Canada's National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. We must always remember the 14 women who died that day and all of the other women and girls who have been hurt or killed simply because of their gender. It's also a day to recommit ourselves to taking action to ensure all of our public spaces, our campuses, our workplaces, and our homes are safe for everyone. Because 31 years later, after 14 women died at gunpoint on a single day in Montreal, Canada is still not yet a safe country for women and girls. On average, a woman is killed by her intimate partner every 6 days in Canada. Every 9 seconds, a woman is assaulted, and Indigenous women and girls in Canada face even higher rates of violence than non-Indigenous women. Before the pandemic, our province already had one of the worst domestic violence statistics in the country. And unfortunately, the pressures and uncertainty connected to the current COVID-19 crisis has led to a spike in cases. Like that terrible night on December 6, 1989, it is hard not to hear these numbers and feel helpless. This is one of the reasons we have gathered folks together this morning to share information about the critical violence, prevention, and recovery work YWCA Edmonton does in our city and region. Before we delve into that, I want to introduce Professor Lana Wells, our keynote speaker. Professor Wells is conducting groundbreaking research right here in Alberta that aims to end violence against women and girls. She is the Brenda Stratford Chair in the Prevention of Domestic Violence and Associate Professor at the University of Calgary's Faculty of Social Work. She is also a faculty member at the U of C's School of Public Policy. We've just posted her full bio in the chat function. We are thrilled that she is joining us today. Professor Wells's work fills me with hope and optimism for the future, and I hope you learn a lot from her address. Professor Wells, welcome to the 2020 Rose Campaign.
Thanks, Catherine. Good morning, everyone. I'm very honored to be here today, surrounded by so many people who care about the work of the YWCA Edmonton and who care so deeply about stopping violence against women and girls. I'd like to begin my presentation by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of these lands, which we each call home. Today's event is to remember and acknowledge December 6th. On December 6, 1989, at L'École Polytechnique in Montreal, 14 women were killed simply because they were women. Canada established December 6 as a National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women, and I'd like to dedicate today's comments towards ending violence against women and girls, and more specifically, commit to working on the root causes behind Canada's staggering rates of violence against Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA people. Research shows that violence in humans is not inherent, meaning that it is created and influenced by external factors, and therefore it can be prevented. There is ample evidence illustrating that several inequities drive violence, many of which are based on historical and structural injustices. These root causes of violence include inequality, poverty, colonial violence, inadequate housing, substandard education, lack of opportunity, as well as shame and isolation. Our attitudes, choices, and actions are shaped by our environment. And while working on structural issues to end violence against women and girls is critical, we can't forget about our influence on each other in our day-to-day interactions. Each and every one of us here today can play a role in stopping violence. We can and do influence those around us. We influence the behaviors of our friends, our family, our neighbors, and our colleagues. So today, my presentation is targeting you. I'm going to share what I think you can do as a friend, family member, neighbor, and coworker when someone around you is experiencing violence. Your role is so important, especially now. Since the pandemic started, fewer people are reaching out to formalize organizations like the police and shelters. This means that you and I are needed now more than ever. All of us need to be reaching out and connecting to those in our networks. This is especially important because Alberta statistics suggest that 3/4 of you sitting here today know at least one woman that has been physically or sexually assaulted. In Alberta, every hour of every day, a woman will be a victim of some form of interpersonal violence by an ex-spouse or ex-partner. And this year alone in Edmonton, there were over 8,000 police-reported incidents of domestic violence, up 16% from this time last year. And even though violence is so prevalent around us, the majority of us are unsure of what action to take when someone tells us that they are being abused. I've been a social worker for over 20 years, and even I wasn't sure about the best course of action to take when someone disclosed their abuse to me. because my career has been focused on working with governments and community leaders. I'm not a clinician, but like you, I am a friend, a neighbor, and colleague, and someone trusted me with her story. Over 5 years ago, a woman whose daughter was in my son's class connected with me. I noticed one day she was looking upset, and I asked if she was doing okay. She disclosed that she was experiencing domestic violence. She had no idea about the work I was involved in. I was just someone she thought she could trust. So she came to my home that day and she shared her story of over 10 years of abuse. She described the confusion and shame she felt, the fear she had been living in, and the frustration that he wouldn't change. She also talked about the love she still had for him. She desperately wanted to believe he was going to change. I listened for many hours and I told her it was not her fault, that she was not to blame. But inside, I wanted to do more. I'm a doer and I wanted to act and help. The next day, I called colleagues who work with victims of abuse and learned the best thing I could do was to keep listening, be supportive, not blame her, and give her information on resources available in the community for when she was ready. What research tells us is that the quality of your response, and what I mean by that is how you react to your friend, your colleague, or family member's experience of violence, is directly related to their level of distress and future healing. If we don't blame or shame the victim, if we don't judge the victim, if we tell her we believe her, and we acknowledge that the sole responsibility of the violence is on the perpetrator, we can improve her mental and physical health. We can increase her safety and sense of worth. We can reduce the level of distress, depression, anxiety, and we can improve her quality of life. By providing an appropriate reaction to our friend, we can increase her readiness to contact formal supports like the police or social services or agencies like the YWCA Edmonton. And most importantly, a positive response can reduce the reoccurrence of violence. Wouldn't you want to have that kind of impact? It is my hope when you leave here today, you will believe that you can make a difference in a victim's life and that you can recognize abuse. You will be able to respond to it appropriately, and you know of resources that are available in the community to get the help your friend or colleague needs. Research says you can make a difference in preventing domestic violence by remembering the 3 R's: recognize, respond, and refer. When this amazing woman came to me for support, I listened to her. I recognized and confirmed to her that she was in an abusive relationship. And I responded to her with positive messages that she is strong, she is not to blame, and that she knows what is best for her and her family. We then talked about a safety plan, how to keep her and her daughter safe. We discussed telling her parents, and then I gave her a phone number and website and suggested when she feels ready to, that she should reach out to local services as they are really good at supporting women who are experiencing violence. I also told her to call or text anytime she needed to talk. So what is domestic violence? When they think of domestic violence, most people think about physical types of abuse or violence. But there are many forms of abuse, and most of it you can't see. There is sexual, emotional, and verbal. There is psychological, financial, and social. So for example, stopping her from having access to a family or friend. Other forms of abuse include using technology, cultural and spiritual abuse, and medical abuse, which includes refusing to allow the victim to seek medical attention for illness or injury. Often abusers will use intimidation threats and will use stalking and harassment to control and humiliate her. So, for example, showing up at her workplace to cause a scene and to harass her, or maybe threatening harm to her children or other family members or her pets and property. All types of abusive behaviors are a deliberate choice of one person exerting power and control over another person. One person is choosing to harm the other person. So in Canada, we know that 90% of violent crimes are committed by men. 98% of sexual assaults are committed by men. And 83% of violence against women is committed by men. We know and acknowledge that men can also be victims of domestic violence, and the impact of abuse on victims is serious regardless of gender. However, the vast majority of victims from domestic and sexual violence and assault are women and girls, and that is why I'm using she throughout my presentation. We also know from research that domestic violence is costly. In 2012, I conducted an economic evaluation of the cost of violence against women in Alberta with Dr. Herb Emery and Casey Boat through the School of Public Policy. We found that the government of Alberta had spent over $600 million in responding to domestic violence over 5 years. And our evaluation did not take into account costs for police services, legal and court costs, or lost time at work. When you add in these costs, the government of Alberta and taxpayers spent well over $1 billion. So we know domestic violence is pervasive. We learn that most victims are women, and we know it is costly for individuals, their families, and for Albertans. We also know from research that it is preventable. Friends, family, neighbors, and colleagues can play a role in prevention by remembering the 3 R's: recognize, respond, and refer. If we all take responsibility to recognize abuse, respond appropriately, and know resources in the community to refer, we can together make a difference to prevent domestic violence and support the recovery process. So you might be asking yourself right now, how do I do that? So first, you can acknowledge today, right now, that you do have a role in preventing domestic violence. And second, that you understand that how you react to a victim matters. What you say or do matters to their recovery. So why am I trying to engage you? Because guess what? Many of you are already playing a role. In the research, we call you informal supporters or social supporters. That is, the majority of you here this morning already know someone who's a victim of violence because they've already disclosed their experience to you, which means that you have an opportunity to play a role, positive or negative, in that person's life. 80% of women who are victims of violence and almost 60% of men who are victims of violence disclose their experiences to a friend, family member, neighbor, and/or coworker. Only 15% of Canadians experiencing domestic violence disclose to the police. And that number is dropping. Fewer and fewer people are going to police informal services, especially now because of COVID-19. Statistics Canada tells us that the majority of victims in Canada disclose to you. Friends and family and coworkers are the #1 resource for victims. Not the police, not social service agencies, not women's shelters. Victims go to you. And this makes sense, doesn't it? Victims of violence come to you and rely on you before, during, and after a crisis. That means many of us are already involved as informal advocates or caretakers, lawyers and therapists, and many of us can be engaged in that process for years. We are all so critical to preventing domestic violence because we already have a relationship with the victim, and therefore there's already a sense of safety and trust. We also influence and shape norms. That is, we influence our friends' behaviors by shaping what is acceptable or not acceptable about relationships. So did you know that you could have this much influence on preventing domestic violence and reducing the impact of violence? So what's getting in our way to help, to intervene, or to respond to victims in a supportive way? Well, first off, many of us have a lot of fear and safety issues. We are worried about getting hurt. We are worried about losing relationships, and we feel that we lack the skills to intervene safely. In my situation, because of my work, I was able to call a few colleagues who specialize in working with victims, and they helped guide me to respond in a safe and supportive way. If someone discloses to you and you are feeling unsure how to respond, just remember, your reaction matters. So it is okay to just listen respectfully and acknowledge their experience and thank them for sharing. There are several other barriers that prevent us from responding in a supportive way. So, for example, many of us hold social and cultural beliefs that stop us from intervening. A lot of us still believe that domestic violence is a private issue. And several of us are still holding on to traditional beliefs about the sanctity of marriage at all costs. Many of us here today believe if the violence is that bad or that serious, she will leave or should leave. Many of us don't understand the complexity of leaving an abusive relationship. Often women don't leave because of the history they share with their partner or because of the pressure from family and friends to stay together. There is so much guilt and shame in ending a relationship in our culture, and often there are kids involved. Finances also play a significant role. Research shows that many women do not have the financial means to leave. And many years ago, the Alberta Council of Women's Shelters conducted a study with women leaving shelters to find out why they were going back home. And 55% stated because they did not have the financial means to leave. In my friend's case, part of the hesitation to leave the relationship was that her family was interconnected with their finances. Her parents had invested in his business. The whole family was financially tied together in a serious way. And also, she still loved him. Leaving is complex, and we know that it can sometimes be very dangerous to leave. Statistics show that a woman is most at risk of a serious injury or death within 6 months of leaving the relationship. As in my friend's case, and for most victims, we have to trust that she knows her situation better than we do. She is the expert in her own life. Often we just need to be there to listen and support. Another reason why many of us struggle to help victims is that we feel helpless. We don't know what to do or say, and that's okay. We do not have to have all the answers. We can still be supportive. Lastly, we all lack practical information and skills about ways to effectively handle disclosures and support the victim. We did not learn these skills at school or in the workplace. No one has taught us how to support victims in a safe and effective way. To respond effectively and intervene safely, it's a skill, and one that we need to learn and practice. In our research at the university, we have learned that when friends, family members, and coworkers understand the need to reach out and do it in a way that does not blame or shame the victim's shame is reduced and they are not further traumatized in our attempt to improve their situation. We also know that when we support the victim and take their lead, she's also going to be more likely to reach out to formal services for help. Research shows we can make a difference in a victim's recovery and in preventing abuse from happening again. So, how can you respond in an appropriate way to a disclosure? Always listen respectfully and compassionately, and be non-judgmental. Be aware of your nonverbal body language, be open and receptive, focus on them, not the clock. Watch your tone and pace of conversation. Use a soft voice. Don't be patronizing. Don't interrupt. Be patient. Be mindful of what you say. Empathy, not pity. Don't shame her. Finally, believe her. Tell her the abuse is wrong and that it is not her fault. You can make a difference in her life. The initiative I'm leading at the Faculty of Social Work is called SHIFT, the Project to End Domestic Violence at the University of Calgary, is working closely with government and human service agencies to ensure that there is training and support available for informal supporters, people like you and me. We have spent years researching and supporting agencies throughout Alberta to understand the role and importance of informal supports and have encouraged many agencies to include informal supporters in their prevention strategies. So there are agencies that have programs where they train community members and professionals on the 3 R's. That's recognize, respond, and refer. There are other groups championing a campaign called Real Talk, and that's to help build capacity of informal supporters throughout Alberta. And then, of course, there are critical organizations like the YWCA Edmonton that are providing counseling and supports to informal supporters. Whether you are a victim or a friend or family member or coworker that knows someone who's being abused, they are here to support you. During this past year, COVID-19 has created additional risk factors for many victims due to confinement and the stay-at-home orders that trapped victims in the home. The increased stress due to job loss and financial strain, which has destabilized some families and resulted in increased violence among men who had not previously engaged in violent behaviors. And there's been an increase in unhealthy coping mechanisms like alcohol. There is a link between alcohol and violence. And then the overall lack of access to formal supports due to reduced hours or closures as a result of the pandemic. These additional risk factors mean that now more than ever, you and your support matter. So this presentation is a call to action to each and every one of you here today to reach out in your networks and check in on your family, your friends, your neighbors and coworkers that you believe might be at risk. Okay, so let's recap now. What did we learn today? That the majority of you sitting here today either knows someone or has personally experienced domestic or sexual violence. That the vast majority of victims of domestic and sexual violence are women. That the perpetrator is the only one responsible for the violence, not the victim. That victims usually go to you, that is, they go to friends, family, and coworkers to disclose their abuse. And that your reaction to a disclosure matters. You can improve her mental and physical well-being when you believe her, don't judge her or blame her, tell her it's not her fault, and listen respectfully and compassionately. Your positive response is an important piece of her healing journey. Finally, I hope everyone here today feels that they can play a role in preventing domestic violence. Research shows that by just having the belief that you can make a difference is linked to action. So the first step is believing you can make a difference. I want to end this morning's presentation on a positive note. Throughout the years, I continued to gently support the woman who disclosed violence to me, and she would randomly contact me every 3 or 4 months. And I would try to send supportive texts throughout the years, and we would talk occasionally on the phone. A few years ago on a Saturday when I was out at the store with my son, she called me. She wanted me to know that she had left him and that she had moved in with her parents. And while it was really, really hard, she was slowly starting the healing process. Today, she is a successful businesswoman with her own home, raising her daughter in a loving and supportive network. I mentioned that last detail because violence doesn't just impact women physically. It robs them of their promise and potential. It is incredibly difficult to contribute to the world in really productive ways when you're beaten down physically or emotionally or psychologically on a regular basis. When violence stops, women are able to flourish in all kinds of ways. I'd like to sincerely thank the YWCA of Edmonton for inviting me here today. And I'd also like to thank you for taking part in this important event. If you would like more information on our research and prevention efforts, please feel free to contact me directly or head over to our website, which you can find up on the screen. Have a wonderful event. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wells, for sharing your research and for sharing ways we can all end violence against women and girls in our community. This is why our work is so important and why I'm so proud to do the work I do at the YWCA Edmonton. My work is within the Girl Space program, and it is so inspiring because I get to see firsthand the impact that having a program available to young women. It's amazing to see them transform, how having a safe space with reliable, safe, fun mentors and knowledgeable mentors can have an impact on young women. It's just amazing to see them build the confidence, to see them become each other's cheerleaders and supporters, and honestly, take up space. Yes, we love when our girls take up space. Of course, I could talk about this forever, but for sake of time, I'd like to take a moment and share a recent event we've had at our Girl Space program. We recently had a participant come to Girl Space and share with the facilitator that they no longer felt safe attending after school programming. When asked why, the participant shared that another male student has created different online social media accounts and has been messaging, harassing, commenting on the participants' posts, and being in person in programming made for a very awkward and uncomfortable time. We asked the participant if she's let her family know or spoken to anybody in the after school program, and she shared that she didn't. And as to her family, she was concerned about how they might react about what's been happening. So our facilitator asked if it's okay for us to speak to the after school program staff and to the school just to make them aware of the situation and see how we can all work together so that she feels safe again in school. Our facilitator spoke with the school and with the after school program staff, and they were able to come up with a resolution, but also to speak to the young man and let him know that his behavior is unacceptable. I mean, just having the safe space in school is a great outlet for girls, because had there not been no girl space, this participant would most likely have carried this around for a very long time and caused more damage long term. But having a safe space where she knew she could turn to and speak to somebody without any judgment, without fear of how they might react, can have such a great impact. And it's amazing that we could work with our schools and different agencies so that we are able to create a safe space for all young women. YWCA Edmonton's work could not be possible without the support of the community. At this time, we would like to thank the rest of our sponsors who have helped make this virtual Rose campaign possible this year. Thank you very much to EPCOR, Havana, Canadian Western Bank, Shore Jardine, McLeod Properties, Salute, the Adams Agency, the Creative Hive, and Zocolo. We would like to share a quick note from a few of our sponsors, Havana, Canadian Western Bank, and Salute.
Hi, my name is Katie and I work for Havana. We develop, own, and operate affordable housing because we know that providing a safe space to women and girls is the first step in preventing gender-based domestic violence. Thank you to the YWCA Edmonton for the opportunity to participate and to sponsor the Jean Forrest Girls Table. We know that this will have an impact. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the annual Rose Campaign Breakfast. My name is Jeremy Hayward. I'm chair of the Philanthropy Committee here at the YWCA. I'm also president and CEO of Salou, an IT solutions provider here in the downtown core. I want to say thank you for coming as a sponsor here. It means a lot to us that you're here supporting this cause today. So thank you very much for your support in ending violence against women and girls.
Last week, I spoke with a woman who faced a very violent attack from a family member, and it just devastated me to listen to her story and to hear what she had experienced. But it strengthened my resolve to be here today and to make a difference. In the environment that we're faced with today in dealing with this pandemic, violence against women has just escalated, and we must do our part to stop this. I stand here today to represent my employer, the Canadian Western Bank Financial Group, who is an active and a strong supporter of the YWCA in Edmonton, because we believe in the growth and the empowerment of women of all backgrounds. But I also stand here today as the past president of the board of directors of the YWCA in Edmonton. And I take this opportunity to ask you to take a stand against gender-based violence because it's just not acceptable. You, each of you, can help at least one woman, one family, get the services and the programs that the YWCA Edmonton provides. And you, each of you, can give that gift of hope and of refuge from violence that so many of us have the privilege of taking for granted. So thank you for your support today.
Thank you, Ivana, Canadian Western Bank, and Salute for your words. And again, to all of our sponsors for their support of the Rose campaign. Now, I'd like to invite Catherine back on the screen to tell you more about the work of the YWCA Edmonton and the impact we have on our community. Catherine?
This work is important, and at YWCA Edmonton, we are committed to ending gender-based violence. Every year, we proudly provide violence prevention and recovery programs that help thousands of women, girls, and gender-diverse people in the Edmonton region. From Lakeside Haven, a retreat for women and children who have experienced family violence, to our advocacy work combating human trafficking, to our affordable counseling services, we offer a wide variety of support. Our dedicated staff does incredible work, and I'd like now to share a story from Marlon Walker, a registered psychologist on our counseling services team. She writes, quote, "I've seen a lot of families during my 14 years as a counselor at YWCA Edmonton. Many of the families I treat are dealing with domestic violence in the home. One such family that stands out in my mind is a mother and her 2 young sons that came to my office a few years ago. At the time, they had just left an abusive environment with an extremely controlling and abusive husband. In fact, the mother had been physically abused so much during the pregnancy of her youngest son, it resulted in premature labor. The child has struggled with communication and learning challenges since birth. But with the help from YWCA Edmonton Counselling Services and other supportive agencies in our community, this child's behavior has changed dramatically. He was able to start communicating more effectively, and his learning challenges improved. Although there are still obstacles to overcome, the mother was able to leave that abusive relationship, and the family has started to heal. It takes a while to break through the cycle of violence, creating a safe space so children can make sense of their world and providing a healthy environment where they're not, quote, walking on eggshells, is critical for a child's mental well-being. With help, they can progress positively into adulthood with the right tools for success. Thanks for your powerful story, Marlon. That's how we break the cycle of violence and make the world a safer place for everyone. It's work we are so proud to do at YWCA Edmonton. And unfortunately, the pandemic has only made our work more urgent. We are doing everything possible to meet the growing need in our community for support during this unprecedented public health emergency, including a new initiative I'm excited to tell you about today. We are planning over the Christmas season to offer free counseling services to women currently residing in shelters within Edmonton, Sherwood Park, and Morinville. We know at this time of year, our data shows us that folks need help more than ever to get through the holiday season. And so as we see a steady demand for help, we want to be there with a helping hand. We're also going to be providing 1 to 2 free Chromebooks to these shelters to help support our counseling initiative. So how can you help YWCA continue our critical work? Step 1, make a donation. Whether it's a $10 monthly donation or a larger one-time gift, every single dollar helps us continue our work to end violence against women and girls in our community. Step 2, volunteer or follow our social media channels to learn more about our efforts and how you can get involved. And step 3, help us fight for lasting change by demanding action on stopping violence against women and girls, demanding justice for those who have been denied it, speaking up about violence in our community. Before I close, I want to thank our generous sponsors for helping make the 2020 Rose campaign such a success. And I want to thank you for joining us today. We have folks watching from across Edmonton, Alberta, and Canada, and we appreciate your support and interest. Please take time to reflect on the significance of December 6th and know that you have taken action today to end violence against women and girls. Dunya, back to you to wrap up today's event.
Thank you, Catherine. This has been such a powerful and inspiring morning. Thank you all for being part of this year's Rose campaign presented by EPCOR's Heart and Soul Fund. Tonight and Sunday night, you will notice a number of buildings lit in red around the city of Edmonton to honor the 14 women and commemorate the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. Look to the High Level Bridge, Hotel McDonald, Chateau Lacombe, Edmonton House, WSP Place, and others. Take a moment to reflect on the significance of this day and know that today you have taken action to end violence against women. Once again, beautiful people, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have a blessed day, and thank you for your continuous support to the YWCA Edmonton.